I still remember the exact moment when my world felt like it had quietly collapsed. The kind of collapse that doesn't make a sound but leaves your chest tight, your hands trembling, and your mind racing with disbelief. It was a warm afternoon, the sunlight spilling through the tall windows of my father's office, painting golden lines across the polished wood. The faint smell of leather and old paper filled the air, familiar yet suffocating in that moment. I sat in front of Mr. Hayden, my father, feeling smaller than ever, even though I had faced bigger storms before. "Why are you still with her?" His voice was calm, steady, but it carried a weight that pressed down on me. I blinked, trying to grasp his meaning. "What? What do you mean, Dad?" He leaned back in his chair, hands steepled, eyes fixed somewhere beyond me, as if the sunlight itself had answers he wanted to read. "I let her go today. I fired her." The words hit me like cold water. Fired her. Not some employee, not a business partner. Mariah. The woman whose laughter had become my morning music, whose smile lingered in my thoughts even when I was tired and broke. The one I had promised myself to, with no thought for her money, her world, or her father's expectations. I felt my heart tighten, my throat caught. "Why? Why would you do that?" I whispered, almost too afraid to hear the answer. His eyes softened, just a fraction, like a candle flickering in the dark. "I'm testing you, Maxwell. I need to know. If you really love her." I wanted to stand up, to shout, to defend her, to tell him that love isn't a test, that it isn't something you approve or disapprove of. But all I could do was sit there. The silence in the room was heavy, almost painful. And Mariah, she was gone, not because of anything she had done, but because of the power, the pride, and the fear that ruled Mr. Haddon's world. And in that quiet, sunlit office, I realized something I hadn't known before. Love can be fragile, but some choices, some truths, are stronger than money, stronger than fear, stronger than a father's expectations. I suppose I should start from the beginning, so you can understand how fragile it all seemed, and how easily someone else's hand could reach into our lives and twist things apart. I grew up in a small, quiet neighborhood, where the streets smelled of rain and dust, where laughter came from children chasing kites, and neighbors borrowed sugar instead of money. Life wasn't easy, but it was honest. My father wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't anyone of importance. My pockets were almost always empty, but my heart was full of dreams, no matter how small or unreachable they seemed. Mariah, she was the opposite of everything I had known. She came from a world where glass towers touched the clouds, where people drove cars that cost more than my entire life's savings, where dinner conversations included stocks, art investments, and charitable foundations. She was beautiful not just in the way that made heads turn, but in a way that made the room feel warmer when she smiled, and the air lighter when she laughed. When I first met her, I was working 2 jobs to keep my little apartment from falling apart. I remember spilling coffee on my shirt during our first date, and instead of laughing, she reached out, brushed it away, and smiled so gently that I nearly forgot to breathe. I didn't know then how fragile that smile would become in the face of a world that demanded her life be polished, perfect, and untouchable. Our love was quiet, almost secret at first. We would meet at small cafes where the smell of fresh bread mingled with the soft notes of a piano, or sit on park benches watching the sun fall behind the trees. She never once made me feel small because of my life or my wallet. In fact, she seemed to love the little things about me, the way I talked to people, the way I cared about things she'd never think of, the way I dreamed. But there was always Mr. Hayden, the shadow that stretched over our happiness, though he never spoke loudly. He was a man whose presence filled a room even when he was silent. Wealth, power, and control were his language. He believed in order, in status, and perfection. And he didn't believe that someone like me could ever be enough for his Mariah. I remember the first time I met him. He shook my hand slowly, eyes sharp, studying me as if I were a painting he was unsure he wanted to hang on his wall. "So, you're the one," he said finally, his tone polite but distant. "Maxwell, let's see if you're worthy of my daughter." I smiled politely, feeling the weight of those words press against my chest. I didn't know then that this would become a test I could never fully prepare for, a test that would reach into the very heart of our love, threatening to tear it apart. Even then, Mariah whispered to me as we left his office, "Don't worry about him. Just be yourself. He'll see." Her faith in me was quiet, steady, unwavering. And for a while, I believed it. Life went on in small, simple ways. Dates at little diners, walks under neon streetlights. The kind of love that feels like a secret treasure in a world that doesn't understand it. We laughed, we dreamed, we planned a future together. And yet, no matter how far we ran from it, the shadow of Mr. Hayden always lingered. Every conversation, every decision, every stolen moment of happiness carried the weight of his silent approval. I knew that one day everything might come crashing down, but I never expected it to happen so quietly, so suddenly, and so heartbreakingly. Things never happened all at once. Life, at least mine with Mariah, was a series of quiet pressures. Small shadows that grew longer over time until they touched everything we tried to build together. At first, it was subtle. A glance from Mr. Hayden that lingered too long, a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. When we first told him that we were planning to move in together, his approval wasn't shouted. It was a whisper, I suppose. If it suits her. He said it as if she were a delicate object he didn't want me to break. Mariah tried to ignore it, tried to brush off the tension with her usual warmth. Maxwell, she said one evening, as we sat on the balcony of her small, luxurious apartment, one of the few places she allowed me to feel comfortable. He just wants what's best. You know that, right? I nodded, watching the city lights flicker below. I wanted to believe her, desperately, but there was something in the way her fingers trembled when she spoke about him. Something in the quiet hesitation of her tone that told me she wasn't just talking about him, she was talking about me. At first, I tried to rise above it. I told myself that love was enough. I reminded myself of our laughter, our shared dreams, the way her hand fit perfectly in mine. I reminded myself of the nights when she whispered, "It's just you and me, Maxwell. That's all that matters." But as time passed, small things began to pierce that bubble of simplicity we had built. It started with her work. Mariah, despite her wealth, had ambitions of her own. She ran a charity foundation, attended high-level business meetings, and sometimes had to negotiate with people I barely understood. I admired her dedication, but I felt helpless. I couldn't relate to her world, and sometimes the way she talked about contracts, money, and influence made me shrink into myself. I felt like a boy playing dress-up in a world he didn't belong to. Then came the subtle comments from Mr. Hayden. One evening, as we all sat down for dinner at his mansion so vast that I still got lost trying to find the bathroom, he casually remarked, "Mariah, you've spent enough time with Maxwell, haven't you? Surely a woman like you deserves more." I froze. I didn't respond because what could I say? That I loved her. That my heart was everything I had to offer. That my small apartment, my worn-out shoes, and my empty bank account were all I could give, and yet it was enough to fill my life with meaning. Mariah's hand found mine under the table. Her touch was gentle, almost apologetic. "Ignore him," she whispered, but I could hear the strain in her voice. She loved me, yes, but she also feared him. Over the next few weeks, the tension became a constant background hum. Meetings with Mr. Hayden were always formal, almost like trials. I felt watched, evaluated, every word I spoke measured against some invisible standard. I remember once during a conversation about a charity gala, he said softly, "You know, Maxwell, sometimes love isn't enough. The world doesn't bend for it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that love was enough, that Mariah didn't need approval to choose me, that I would never hurt her, never leave her, never let anyone take her from me. But the words stuck in my throat. I felt powerless. Then came the misunderstanding that almost broke us. Mariah had to attend a late-night meeting with some high-profile investors. She told me about it, of course, but Mr. Hayden, with his careful, calculated words, suggested to her quietly, almost as advice, that I might not be able to handle the pressures of her world. She came home late that night, tired, apologetic, her eyes full of worry. "Maxwell," she said, sitting beside me on the worn couch of my apartment, he wants to protect me. It's nothing about us." But it felt like everything. I couldn't sleep that night. I paced my small living room, thinking of every whispered word, every quiet glance, every polite but cutting remark from Mr. Hayden. And in that moment, I realized something painful. Sometimes love has to fight not just the world outside, but the very people who raised you. As weeks passed, the pressure didn't ease. Every time Mariah smiled at Tem, it carried a weight I hadn't noticed before, subtle tension. as if she carried a secret worry she couldn't share. And every time Mr. Hayden spoke to me, it felt like a challenge, a quiet test. I was failing simply by being myself. I tried to show my love in small ways. I left notes from Mariah teeny scribbles on napkins, messages hidden in books, reminders that she wasn't alone. I cooked meals even if I burned them half the time. I held her when she cried silently after another exhausting meeting or another quiet comment from her father. I wanted to prove that love wasn't measured in wealth, influence, or appearance. It was measured in loyalty, in kindness, in quiet devotion. But loyalty isn't always enough for some people. One afternoon, Mr. Hayden invited me into his office again. His tone was calm, controlled, but there was an edge I had learned to recognize. "Maxwell," he said, looking at me as if he could, "see the very fibers of my soul? Do you really understand what you're stepping into? This isn't a storybook. Your life, your love, it will be tested." I wanted to argue, I wanted to shout. I choose her. I always choose her. But I didn't. I only nodded, swallowing my frustration. It wasn't just his words that hurt. It was the implication that my love, my heart, my devotion weren't enough. That I might not be worthy of Mariah simply because I didn't have money, because I didn't have influence, because I wasn't like him. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a doubt began to creep into my own mind. Could love really survive in a world ruled by wealth and power? Could my small, quiet devotion ever be enough against his towering presence? It was around that time that Mariah grew distant. Not in her feelings for me, she never stopped loving me, but in her actions. She started spending more time with her father, more time in meetings, more time in worlds I couldn't touch, and I felt powerless. I remember one evening after a particularly tense dinner at the Hayden estate, I finally spoke. "Mariah, I feel like I'm losing you." She looked at me, eyes wide, heart aching. "Maxwell, you're not losing me, I promise. But I don't know how to bridge the world between us. I want to, but he's always there, always watching." It was then that I realized the true weight of Mr. Hayden's power, not just his money, not just his influence, but the way he could shape the people around him. He could make Mariah doubt, even for a moment, her own strength, her own choices. And worse, he could make me doubt myself. And in the midst of that doubt, the seeds of the real conflict were planted. Little incidents began to pile up. A canceled dinner here, a missed phone call there, a comment about how someone like me might not understand her life, each one small, insignificant on its own, but together they became a quiet storm. A storm that left Mariah tired, anxious, and almost apologetic for loving me. I tried to be patient. I tried to understand. I told myself that love wasn't about grand gestures, but about endurance, about holding on when everything else seemed to push you apart. But endurance is exhausting. Even the strongest heart can break when tested too many times, too quietly, too persistently. And then came the first real argument. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, heartbreaking evening in her apartment. "I can't keep feeling like I'm not enough for your father," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "You're more than enough, Maxwell," she replied, tears brimming. "But I can't stop him from testing everything, even us." I shook my head, trying to hold back my own tears. It shouldn't be a test. Love isn't a test. You don't measure love with approval or money. You just feel it, live it, trust it. She nodded, but her silence said more than words ever could. The rift between us wasn't just about Mr. Hayden, it was about the impossible world he had built around us. A world where love had to prove itself to a man who measured everything by wealth and power. And in that silence, I realized the truth. Our love would have to survive not just life, but the weight of someone else's control. Someone who believed that he could decide who was worthy of his daughter. Someone who thought he could test loyalty like it were a game. Little did I know then, that test would take its most cruel form soon. The kind of moment that could shatter trust, hearts, and futures in a single, quiet, unexpected stroke. I'll never forget the day it all came to a head. The air that morning felt heavier than usual, like the world itself was holding its breath. Mariah had been unusually quiet, moving around her apartment with that soft, deliberate grace she always had when something weighed on her heart. I tried to ask her what was wrong, but she only smiled. The kind of smile that was beautiful yet brittle, and said, "Nothing, Maxwell, just a busy day." But I knew better. I always knew better. Love has a way of sensing what words cannot carry. That afternoon, Mr. Hayden called me into his office. His tone was polite, almost gentle, but I had learned to hear the undercurrent of steel beneath it. "Maxwell," he said as I stepped inside, "we need to talk about Mariah." I nodded, my stomach twisting. I could sense it coming, the quiet storm I had feared for months. "I've made a decision," he continued, his eyes locked on mine. "I had to let her go from her position at the foundation. It felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me." I blinked, unable to speak. "What? What do you mean? Let her go?" I finally managed to whisper. He leaned back, hands folded calmly in front of him, as if this were simply a matter of everyday business. "I had to test you, Maxwell. You see, love is more than words. It's not about promises. It's about choice. And sometimes the world forces you to prove your devotion in ways you can't imagine." I wanted to laugh, or cry, or scream. Instead, all I could do was stare. You fired her?" "Yes," he said simply, "but not because of her, because I wanted to see what you would do. I wanted to know if you'd still choose her, even when it seemed like everything was against you." The words should have brought relief, but they didn't. Relief felt hollow, empty. All I felt was anger at him, at the cruel test, at the world that demanded this proof of love, and fear that even Mariah might doubt me now, though she had never stopped loving me. I left the office without another word. The hallways felt longer than ever, the polished floors reflecting a life that suddenly seemed like a lie. I barely noticed the people passing by. All I could think about was Mariah, her gentle eyes, the warmth of her hand in mine, and how easily that warmth had been threatened by someone else's power. When I returned to her apartment, I found her sitting quietly, a folder of papers open on the table. She looked up as I entered. "Maxwell," she whispered, voice trembling. I don't know what to do," he said. "It's for a test, but it doesn't feel like a test when he holds everything over us." I closed the door softly behind me, moving toward her. I didn't know what to say. Words felt useless. Instead, I took her hands in mine, holding them as firmly as I could without crushing the fragile weight of the moment. "You don't need to do anything," I said finally, my voice low, steady. "I'm here. I choose you, always, no matter what." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment the tension of months of the tests, the doubts, the quiet manipulation seemed to crack just enough for us to breathe. She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder, and I held her like I would never let go. But the truth was more complicated. I couldn't just hold her and pretend the world outside our embrace didn't exist. Mr. Hayden had fired her to test me. Yes, but the act itself was cruel, unnecessary, and designed to make us falter. And yet, it revealed something about us both. That night, we sat on the balcony of her apartment, the city lights stretching endlessly below us. She whispered, Do you really mean it? Even after this?" "I mean it," I said, and I wanted her to feel it, not just hear it. "I choose you, Mariah, not for your money, not for your family, not for anything but you, and nothing, not him, not the world, can change that." It was a moment of fragile triumph, but the storm wasn't over. Mr. Hayden's test had been only the beginning. In the following days, I began to see the layers of manipulation I hadn't noticed before. Subtle suggestions, quiet insinuations, moments designed to make me doubt myself. And through it all, Mariah never wavered. She never stopped loving me, but she began to carry the weight of her father's control silently, almost apologetically. One evening, as we walked through a quiet park near her apartment, I finally confronted the truth I had been avoiding. "Mariah, I need to know everything. Did he ever try to sway you? Make you question us?" She looked at me, her eyes soft but firm. "He tried," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't. I could never. I love you too much to let anyone know, matter how powerful, make me doubt that." I pulled her into my arms again, holding her close. "Then we're stronger than him," I said softly. "Stronger than anyone who thinks they can control love." And in that moment, something shifted. Not just between us, but in me. I realized that Mr. Hayden's test, cruel and manipulative as it was, had shown me the depth of my own devotion. It had revealed the strength of our love, even under the weight of power and expectation. I also realized something else. Power can command, influence, and intimidate, but it cannot touch the heart that truly chooses. And my heart had chosen Mariah completely, irreversibly, and without hesitation. The following weeks were quiet, almost reflective. Mariah began to rebuild her foundation work independently, refusing to let her father's actions dictate her choices. I stood by her quietly, unwaveringly, proving that my love wasn't a fleeting emotion or a fragile promise. It was a steadfast presence, a constant in a world of uncertainty. One day, Mr. Hayden asked to see me again. This time, his tone was different, softer, perhaps a little grudging. "Maxwell," he said. I watched. You stayed. You chose her." I looked him in the eye, steady and calm. "Yes," I said. "I chose her, and I always will." He didn't respond immediately. There was a pause, a quiet acknowledgement of something unspoken. Perhaps he understood that real love cannot be tested by power, wealth, or control. Perhaps he realized that the heart cannot be ordered to obey, no matter how much money surrounds it. And in that pause, I felt a quiet victory. Not one of revenge or triumph over him, but of endurance, loyalty, and the unshakable bond between two people who truly love each other. Mariah and I learned something vital through that trial, that love is not measured by approval, by wealth, or by external validation. It is measured by choice, by patience, and by courage in the face of trials that seem impossible to endure. And so, even in the shadow of Mr. Hayden's power, even in the face of manipulation and tests designed to break us, we held on, quietly, steadily. And that, I realized, was far more powerful than anything he could ever control. After that day, when Mr. Hayden had fired Mariah, and I had chosen her despite it all, life began to settle into a strange rhythm. Not the kind of easy, perfect rhythm that some people imagine love to be, but the kind of quiet, steady rhythm that builds trust, patience, and understanding over time. Mariah and I didn't celebrate with grand gestures. We didn't make proclamations or post endless photos of happiness. We simply existed together in the little spaces where life allowed us to breathe. A morning coffee on her balcony, a walk in the park, evenings spent in silence, reading books, or listening to music, where her head rested on my shoulder and I could feel her heart beating just as fiercely as mine. It wasn't that the world outside didn't exist anymore. Mr. Hayden still had his influence, still ran his empire with the same precision and control, and still carried that quiet authority wherever he went. But it no longer touched us. He could control many things, money, businesses, people, but he could not control what was already rooted in our hearts. I remember one particular afternoon. We were in her apartment, rain tapping gently against the windows, the smell of wet earth drifting in through the open balcony door. Mariah was working on some papers for her foundation, reorganizing projects and budgets with a careful hand. I watched her, marveling at the way she carried herself, the grace, the intelligence, the patience she displayed, even after all she had endured. "You're amazing, you know that," I said softly, sitting down beside her. She glanced at me, smiling faintly, but there was a weight behind her eyes, the kind that only comes from having survived trials you never thought you could. "We've been through a lot," she said, voice quiet. "But we're still here." "Yes," I said, taking her hand in mine, "and we'll always be here. No one can take this from us, Mariah, not even him." She squeezed my hand gently. "I know. Sometimes I feel like I owe him an explanation for why I'm still here, why I didn't leave. He's always testing everything about me." I shook my head, smiling faintly. "You don't owe him anything. Not for choosing love, not for being true to yourself. You chose us. That's all that matters." And in that quiet moment, we understood something deeper. Our love had survived the impossible. Not because of grand gestures, but because it was rooted in truth, patience, and unwavering trust. In the days that followed, I began to notice subtle changes. Mariah carried herself with a renewed confidence. She smiled more freely, laughed without hesitation, and made decisions for herself, unafraid of the consequences or her father's judgment. And I felt a strength growing inside me, a quiet power born not from money or influence, but from knowing that I had stayed when it mattered most, that I had chosen love above all else. We even began to rebuild parts of her foundation together. Nothing extravagant, just small steps, quiet work that mattered to people who needed it most. I learned to navigate her world, not as a man trying to impress, but as someone who supported, respected, and loved her. And she learned to trust that my heart, though simple, was unwavering and loyal. One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, painting everything in shades of gold and rose, Mariah and I sat together on her balcony, the wind soft against our faces. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift, not a change in love, but a deeper understanding of it. "You know," I said quietly, "I don't resent him anymore." She looked at me, surprise in her eyes. "You don't?" "No," I said. "He tested us, yes, but he also showed me the depth of my own love, and the strength of yours. I would have chosen you, Mariah, even if the world had tried to stop us. Even if he had done something worse, even if we had nothing at all." She leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. "I would have chosen you too, Maxwell." Every time, and in that quiet, shared breath, I realized something profound. Power can command. Wealth can influence, and control can manipulate, but they cannot dictate the heart. True love, the kind that survives trials, doubts, and tests, is stronger than any empire, stronger than any fortune, stronger than fear. In the weeks that followed, our lives continued quietly. Steadily, Mr. Hayden still tried his subtle tests from time to time, but they no longer shook us. We faced them together, side by side, with patience, understanding, and calm confidence. There was no drama, no loud confrontation, just a quiet, unspoken triumph, the knowledge that our love was unbreakable. I also began to understand that revenge wasn't necessary. There was no need for dramatic gestures, for proving myself in flashy ways, for trying to show him I was worthy. The calm endurance of our love, the steady strength we displayed every day, spoke far louder than anything I could say. He saw us together, unshaken, and I think perhaps finally he understood that love is not a game to be won or lost. It is a quiet, persistent force that cannot be tested, controlled, or taken. Mariah and I also learned forgiveness, not just for him, but for the fear and tension we had allowed into our hearts. We forgave the small doubts, the misunderstandings, the quiet moments of insecurity, and in doing so, we found a freedom that no wealth, no empire, and no outside control could ever take away. Even today, when I think back to that difficult time, I do not feel bitterness or regret. I feel gratitude. Gratitude that we were tested and that we stayed. Gratitude that our love was strong enough to survive trials that might have torn others apart. Gratitude that Mariah chose to trust me, and I chose to trust her. It was in that trust, that quiet, steadfast love, that we found our true power. Not the power of money, influence, or approval, but the power to remain unwavering, loyal, and devoted, even when the world tried to sway us. And in that power, we built a life that no one could challenge. A life rooted not in wealth, not in status, but in something far rarer, far stronger, unwavering love, respect, and trust. Time has a quiet way of revealing what truly matters. Years later, when I look back at everything Mr. Hayden's tests, the tension, the heartbreak that seemed so sharp at the time, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel a deep, steady understanding. Life, love, and loyalty cannot be measured by wealth, by power, or by anyone else's approval. Mariah and I are still together. Our lives are far from perfect. We have challenges, small arguments, and moments of doubt, like everyone else. But the difference now is that we face them together as equals, with trust that cannot be shaken. I've learned that the strength of love is not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the quiet choices you make every single day. The choice to stay, to forgive, to trust, and to love even when the world seems to be against you. Sometimes I still see Mr. Hayden. He has never stopped caring for Mariah in his own way, though his method of showing it has changed. Now, when he looks at me, I feel less judged, less tested. There is a quiet acknowledgement, an unspoken respect that comes not from wealth or power, but from enduring loyalty and love that cannot be broken. I often think about that moment in his office, the moment when he asked why I still chose Mariah after everything he had done. At the time, it hurt more than I can ever describe. It felt like the world had turned against us, and I was powerless to protect the one person I loved most. But now, I see it differently. That moment taught me something essential, that love is not something to be proved to anyone else. It is not a transaction, a test, or a game. It is a quiet, unwavering choice you make every day for the person who has captured your heart. And Mariah, she is the living proof of that truth. She trusted me when it mattered most. She loved me even when circumstances were unfair, even when her father's world threatened to pull us apart. Together, we built something that could not be shaken by money, influence, or fear. We built a life rooted in honesty, trust, and patience. Now, when I hold her hand, I feel calm. I feel whole. I feel the quiet triumph of love that endured everything the world tried to throw at it. And I know, without a doubt, that no empire, no fortune, and no power could ever match the value of the heart we share. In the end, wealth cannot measure the worth of love. Power cannot control it. Approval cannot dictate it. True love lives in the quiet moments, the shared glances, the gentle touch, the unwavering decision to stay. And that is the lesson I carry with me every day. That love, when chosen with courage and devotion, is stronger than anything else in this world. So, if you are listening to this, perhaps in a quiet room late at night, I want you to remember, hold close the ones you love. Protect them with your heart. Choose them when it matters. And let the world try its tests, its pressures, and its judgments. Because, in the end, what truly matters is not wealth. Status, or power it, is the quiet, steadfast choice to love and to remain loved in return.